Hello and welcome to the Property Pod, South Africa's premier property investor and industry insights podcast. This show also features as a vodcast on our YouTube channel, Moneyweb TV, as well as weekly podcasts on various major platforms such as Iono, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We have a bit of a technical glitch this week, so we don't have a video. But we're talking residential property now. Foreign and international buyers have shown increasing interest in SA's luxury properties over the last 25 years. And Cape Town in the Western Cape has been the main hotspot on this front in South Africa. But what do current buying trends and patterns look like? Is there interest beyond Cape Town and the Atlantic seaboard? And what about the impact on Cape Townians and the cost of living there? Now, we're taking a broader look beyond just the Western Cape. Joining me on this week's episode is Paul Stevens, CEO of Just Property. And Just Property is a national real estate agency group that is based out of Nelson Mandela Bay. Yes, that's the Eastern Cape, but his group has 25 years experience in the industry and has a national footprint. And it's good to have someone with insights from that part of the world. Paul, very warm welcome to the Property Pod.
Siren, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be with you this morning.
How's the weather down in Gqeberha?
It's fine and mild today, but I do believe the whole country is bracing itself for some cold weather that's coming from down in the Western Cape that we're going to talk a little bit about today. So we get blessed a few days after them with the cold weather.
So that's your neighbors. Do you have quite a big presence in the Western Cape?
Yes, we do. We've got quite a few offices in Cape Town itself and then spread around the Western Cape into many of the smaller towns, from Hermanus to Longabon to Riebeek, Castile, and the likes, many of the smaller towns too.
Okay, so it's not an outsider, as it were, commenting on the Western Cape market. You have actual tangible presence there. Now, Paul, a recent release from your group highlights Lightstone data about foreign ownership and buying patterns in the SA residential property market. It noted that around 39-40% of sales are above 20 million rand is by international buyers. I don't want to share too much from that release, but can you share more insights on this? How the more valuable property, side as you move up the cost, foreign buyers with pounds and euros increases. Can you share some insights on that?
Yeah, sure, Suren. So that was interesting data that was released very recently by Lightstone. And basically, it's spread across a board where foreign buyers make up in South Africa for about 6% of property transactions. Whereas, if we take it back to pre-COVID, people often wonder, what was it? Is this growing trend or is it not? And it has. It certainly has been a growing trend. What is sparking that? I think is purely South Africa, and particularly the Western Cape has become a very desirable investment destination, not just purely from the beauty that our country has, but there are various things. People always factored in safety and things like that. But I think those that have traveled here and come to explore South Africa have realized that what the public put it out to be, or the press put it out to be, it's actually a wonderful country to come and live, potentially a very good country to invest in, hopefully. And if we focus on the Western Cape, because we're talking about where the majority of our foreign buyers are coming, and has certainly been into the Western Cape. And as you mentioned, the portion or the percentage of them tends to grow as the value goes up. So Lightstone in their publication released that 15% of buyers are foreign between the 4 and the 10 million, 26% between the 10 and the 20 million, while almost 40% of our buyers above 20 million are foreigners. It's exactly 39%. So there's pockets. If we talk about the Western Cape and Cape Town in particular, it's very much that Atlantic seaboard that we're referring to. And even certain suburbs within the Atlantic seaboard, one that they mention is almost 2/3 of buyers has been the little tiny suburb of Llandudno on the Atlantic seaboard, where 2/3 of buyers are foreigners. And there, it's purely because the average property price is above 20 million. I think it's around almost 24 million is the average property price there. But that being said, even Sea Point, if you can see how Sea Point, they're knocking old buildings down and building new buildings, and all of those new buildings are coming in at really, really high prices from a South African perspective. But again, I think in Sea Point area, it's also a huge portion of maybe close to 50% of buyers that are foreign buyers buying in that area, even stripping all the way down into the city centre of Cape Town as foreign buyers. So is it only in Cape Town? No, because, the Western Cape, the percentage that Lightstone mentioned is 7.8% are foreign buyers across the whole Western Cape. And that's generally your very high value properties, so your expensive properties. Whereas in Gauteng, falling slightly short of that is around 7.3% of foreign buyers. So that sounds interesting, but those are much lower volume, or not just lower volume, should I say, lower value properties. That's very much like our standard average price in South Africa, around 1.8 million. So many foreigners there are buying your cheaper properties more for investments. So yeah, we're not seeing it either just in the big cities. We're also starting to see a lot of it in some of your smaller towns. So your coastal towns, I think, are your predominant ones. So if we're looking in the Western Cape, you've got your smaller towns up the west coast like Paternoster, and coming up the east coast, you've got places like Hermanus that are attracting buyers. And then outside of the Western Cape, even places like KZN, North Coast have attracted a lot of foreign buyers. And down into the Garden Route, you've always had a huge portion of buyers in places like Knysna and Plet, and more recently into the Eastern Cape, places like St. Francis Bay are starting to have foreign buyers' interest. And stretching into our inland towns, we've got places around the Kruger area and Hoedspruit that are attracting foreign buyers. And various other smaller towns down in the Western Cape, particularly places like Riebeeck-Kasteel, Stanford, Franschhoek-Paarl. Those security estates seem to be a big pull down in the Western Cape and the Paarl area. You have Pearl Valley, which is a big one that attracts, and Val de Vie that attracts a lot of foreign buyers.
Thanks for that well-rounded, insight there. But since you are from, your head office is based in the Eastern Cape and in Gqeberha, can you give us some insights on that market, from a foreign perspective? But are things picking up generally in that part of the world, Nelson Mandela Bay? It would be remiss of me not to ask.
So, an interesting question that. I sit with bated breath. We've got a little bit of a governance issue in Nelson Mandela Bay, as we're experiencing in many parts of the country. So going into our municipal elections towards the end of this year, I think we're all hoping to see some sort of change in our municipality, because we are a city that's regressing very fast. But despite that, there's still been interest in investment, not just immigration investment. We've actually also got a small portion of foreign investment that's coming into town, particularly driven around industry. So there has been a remarkable amount of industry that's come into Port Elizabeth, into our IDZ area in Gqeberha, and that brings with it a lot of people. And some of those people, it's foreign industry that's coming into the motor industry particularly, and that's bringing foreigners. And there's no place with true value, I believe, or undervalued property than a place like Gqeberha from a city perspective. We really have a very great quality of lifestyle, and the property prices, I believe, are very cheap. You're getting good value for money compared to places in the Western Cape. We've got an airport that's very accessible, and we are finding there are a certain amount of people that have semigrated here, commute up to Gauteng for business. So yes, we're all waiting with bated breath to see what happens in elections, and I do believe our pretty stagnant property prices, if there's change in governance coming, I think we're going to see the whole Eastern Cape start to flourish around us, particularly, and hopefully that'll push property prices up in our area in the very near future.
There's no doubt tremendous potential, not just in the metros in the Eastern Cape, but broadly speaking, you go further up the coast around the Wild Coast, and I think the World Bank has highlighted the opportunities that could come about with that new Wild Coast toll that could open up more opportunities for that part of the world. Paul, thank you for that. I know it's a slight off topic. We're largely talking foreign interest. But I interviewed Adrian Gardner, who's based out of the Eastern Cape last year, I think, and obviously he's doing some great things with his own group to get more international interest in that part of the world. Paul, turning back to Cape Town, we know the impact of foreign buyers, especially on the Cape Town market and Atlantic seaboard. But just to put it in practical terms, if you are, and I'm talking much higher than the 20 million, because 20 million might not get you that much in the Atlantic seaboard. If you're looking at a 160 or 170 million rand property, that equates to around just $10 million. But what are the trends for your group, especially post-COVID? Has everything gone back to boom times for the Western Cape and Cape Town in terms of the property luxury market, as it were, and I'm talking super luxury now?
Yes, Suren. When we say boom times, I think that's exactly what the Cape is currently experiencing. And funnily, every year we're sort of thinking, okay, we're starting to reach a point where it's going to start leveling off a little bit and quietening down, but it doesn't seem to be slowing down. So there is still extreme demand. So again, the demand is far greater than the actual supply. So hence the property prices continue to climb. And I'm not just talking on the top end of the market. We're seeing it across the spectrum, but particularly the top end of the market. You hear of properties coming available and being snapped up immediately. They're not sitting on the market long. Very often there's, a list of potential buyers waiting to purchase property. We know that many of particularly the Atlantic seaboard properties, new developments that are coming on are being hyped up with pre-sort of launch on websites, and when they go live on a website, very often, you've got 100 units selling off in a matter of days. So there's tremendous demand, and I don't think it's just been pushed by, one group of buyers that we're referring to as the international people. The demand has been pushed by a variety of factors, and in particular, this immigration, I do believe, still continues. It's as much as there has been an element of reverse semigration that people talk of. That happening, there are still people that want to move to the Western Cape. Purely when I spoke about governance in certain places outside of the Western Cape, where we all worry about what's happening to our cities. One thing that you have certainty of in the Western Cape for now is that it's governed really well, and that if you're investing your money in a property there, you're not going to see it slide backwards in value, which has happened in places like Gauteng. So yes, I think there's still massive demand, there's still massive opportunity, but there's massive challenges that the city of Cape Town particularly faces, with all this global desirability that's been built up there. There's not enough homes being built to meet the demand. And when we say the demand, I'm talking particularly of your average South African. So how do they create that in a city like Cape Town does become somewhat of an issue? How do we move people into places or corridors slightly outside of the city where affordability, houses that are affordable can be built, and that people can commute easily into the city, because commuting has become a massive problem in Cape Town. The traffic is constraining a lot of things. People are traveling up to 2 hours a day commuting from the northern suburbs into the city. So what are the plans for the city to accommodate these sort of things? And I think the city has some challenges that it needs to start sitting around the table. People are talking about rates going up, and what are the rates what's the impact of that going to be? And unfortunately, as your property prices or values increase, your rates are proportionate to that. So sadly, affordability is the big thing in Cape Town, and they're going to have to try and address it. It's actually not even only a Cape Town thing. Affordability is a problem around the whole of South Africa when it comes to property ownership.
Thanks for that, Paul. We'll get to the Cape Town hot topic about affordability in a little bit more detail a little later. But what are the trends that you are seeing in terms of buyer profiles now. Are they using it as, buying to invest and mainly looking at Airbnb options and that sort of thing? Or are there other trends that you can highlight for us?
Surin, because our topic was the foreign buyers, I think you're seeing a multitude there. So one thing that has had a big rise is your digital workers or digital nomads, as they're referred to, where a lot of people moving into Cape Town have come on a permanent basis, so not just a temporary basis. They've moved in and they're working digitally. What has been quite interesting to hear a little bit recently has been the war in the Middle East has sparked pretty much like a shutdown of Dubai. And Dubai always housed your sort of famous influencer, your online influencers. And what we've heard is Cape Town is the hotspot for a lot of these influencers are now moving into Cape Town. So besides just your digital nomads that are moving into Cape Town, you've got influencers, and it's becoming sort of hyped up place for people to come and live. So yes, you've got the people living there, and then you've got Europeans and even some Americans now that are investing. So they'll buy themselves a property that they might come and use for a month or two a year. And then you've got a segment of retired people, I would say, not just in Cape Town, but up the coasts, that will buy properties from a lifestyle perspective, where they swallows, as we call them, and they come and live out here for 6 months of the year. So you have got a multitude, more than just purely from an investment perspective. They're seeing the value of the lifestyle that we have as South Africans, and I think that's the biggest attraction for foreigners.
Now, turning back to the issue of affordability, it is a increasingly hot topic, particularly in the Western Cape, not just for buying property, but even going on holiday there. It's becoming a real issue around the cost factor for ordinary South Africans. As a real estate group, I suppose it's a provocative question, but what is your position on that? Free market, or does something need to be done to try to address this? Can something be done also within the context of the spike? Yes, property values increasing is great as an investment, but if you've been there for 20 years and then suddenly you might be priced out of the market, and it might be unaffordable for you to afford the rates. And Cape Town has been in the spotlight, where SAPOA took the city to court and managed to get that budget decision struck down. So it's a very topical issue in the Western Cape at the moment.
Absolutely, Surin. And I think, those challenges are not only challenges of the Western Cape. We have it in many parts of the country, where particularly in your city urban areas that we've had to challenge rates and things like that. And that sadly is just one of the parts of our country that we have to face, whether it's a well-governed city like Cape Town or other cities that aren't governed well, and proportionately we're almost paying per million same sort of rates as what the Cape is. If you're getting service delivery, I think you should be happy with it. But certainly it is facing its own problem, the Western Cape. And if we start with just the value of properties and, how are your typical South Africans able to live in those areas like the CBD and stretching out into the Atlantic seaboard, where you've got young people wanting to live in Greenpoint and Sea Point on an average salary in Cape Town, managing to afford that. And that is certainly becoming a big constraint. And it is an issue, even from a rental perspective, which is very much our sort of foundation. We come from a strong rental background. And there's massive demand for anything that's affordable. And when I say affordable, unfortunately, your rental rates even have risen as much as the property values, because people are wanting the returns. And hence, so many property owners trying to ensure that they're achieving a certain return have taken their properties where they had long-term tenants and moved these properties into the short-term rental portfolios, where they're getting higher returns. And now you've had certain talk of rates being imposed on, and I think it's imminent, it's going to happen. And on that side, I think it's fair that the short-term rental industry, and if you own a property that you short-term rental, that you pay higher rates, as the hotels and the bed and breakfasts are having to do, just to level the playing field. So what we're going to see is you're going to see people moving further out of the city. And with that, the city just needs to plan things very carefully. How do you create work nodes out into those areas where people are not necessarily having to travel always into the city?
Yes.
So I think a restructure of elements of the city is something that's going to start happening. There's a second airport coming into Cape Town. And with that, it's going to pull, I think, more of a population out that way into the northern suburbs. And that's fine. But how do we move other things out into those areas to accommodate for the people living in those areas and not having to travel? And when it comes to travel, what are they planning with regards to travel route? Are they starting to talk about underground, or they've got the bus that they implemented from certain parts of Cape Town that's working wonderfully, but that's not solving the problem. So the city definitely needs to consider certain things. But the affordability thing, Suren, it's been something that's been faced in many parts of the world, and I think it'll take care of itself.
Yes, definitely. You look at not just the Asian Hong Kong and Tokyo, but Melbourne. We have a lot of South Africans that's immigrated to Australia, and Melbourne and Sydney are very expensive cities. Many South Africans might not necessarily stay in those cities from affordability perspective. But Paul, I'm putting you on the spot here. Can anything be done beyond Airbnb? Do we consider some sort of foreign tax on buyers, or is that a no-go and incentive for people to actually invest in South Africa?
It's something that can be considered. I think potentially higher transfer duties for non-residents is something that can be considered, but where they need to be very careful is to not discourage foreign investment. We still need foreign investment because that's what creates jobs and stimulates our economy, which is, I think, the most important thing right now in South Africa. Is we need to encourage this foreign investment, and it's wonderful to see it. And I wish it existed way beyond just property. We need an industry too. So yes, if they do consider it, it needs to be very carefully considered.
Paul, before you go, just properties expectations for the year ahead. I know it's quite a broad question, but I'm talking about interest rates. We are currently in a slight hiking cycle. It's quite different compared to the latter part of last year, and mainly on the back of what's happening in the Middle East, that ripple effect across most economies. But obviously, higher interest rates impact, the property market in general. But does it really impact the upper end of the market, which we're talking about now, the foreign buyers? Does it really, many of those buyers are cash buyers?
Yeah, 100% right, Sarah. And the top end of the market don't get affected by interest rate cycles. So yes, we are in an upward moving interest rate cycle. We all started the year very optimistic that we were going to see reductions in the interest rates this year. And sadly, none of us were expecting this war in the Middle East. And, that's had a major effect. And we've spoken about affordability today. And sadly, South Africans are getting poorer. Everything, inflation is running away. Everything is becoming more and more expensive. So affordability is a major problem. And, we'd love to try and appeal, but, the Reserve Bank and the Monetary Policy Committee have got to do what they've got to do to contain inflation. But the consumer's under pressure on all fronts. People are effectively earning less because of the cost of everything in South Africa. I mean, we were talking about our municipal rates and taxes, but you just take what an average South African that doesn't even own a property is having to pay, our electricity costs, our service costs that have increased, and obviously fuel now we know is the big one. And with that, everything, food has gone up, and people are under pressure. And where this is going, I think we need to tighten our belts. We're in for a tough rest of the year until we know what's going to happen with the war in Iran. Then things could potentially change, and I think everything does. We go through ebbs and flows, and everything will look positive again soon. I have no doubt.
Let's hope 2027 has that positive outlook and we have some interest rate cuts if things settle in the world. Paul, appreciate your time on the podcast. That was Paul Stevens, and he's the CEO of Nelson Mandela Bay-based Just Property Group, but they are a national player, including in the booming Western Cape.